A thief grabbed a woman's bag, and that was when everything changed. The bustling streets of downtown were alive with noise, but it was the sudden scream of a woman that silenced the air. Her fingers clutched at the strap of her handbag as a young man yanked it from her grasp, a look of panic in his eyes as he sprinted away, weaving through the crowd. People watched but did nothing, their faces a blur of indifference. No one moved. Not even the man sitting on the bench a few feet away. His name was Jack Anderson, and he had seen much worse than this in his time. But Jack was no stranger to injustice. The thief ran past him, barely a glance spared in his direction. Jack's grey eyes followed the thief, not with anger, but with the kind of calm only years of experience could bring. The young man's hasty steps drew closer to Jack's bench, but Jack remained still, his weathered hands folded on his lap. He didn't flinch when the thief paused nearby, looking around to see if anyone would stop him. The woman was still screaming, but the crowd stayed frozen, uncertain. "Come on, old man. Move along," the thief muttered, sneering as he passed. Jack didn't respond. He didn't have to. The thief, now overconfident, turned back to face the woman. "What are you gonna do about it?" he taunted. His words were met with silence. Jack's eyes narrowed, not with malice, but with an unmistakable understanding. He knew exactly how to handle this. Without a word, Jack slowly rose from his bench. The years weighed on his body, but his movements were deliberate, each step measured. He approached the thief as the crowd parted, sensing something was about to unfold. The thief, caught in his own arrogance, didn't even look up until Jack was almost in front of him. "You're not taking that bag," Jack said quietly. The thief laughed, his hand still gripping the bag. "What, old man? You think you can stop me?" He made a move to shove past Jack, but Jack was already ready. With a swift motion, he grabbed the thief's wrist, not with force, but with the precision of a man who had fought many battles in his time. The thief froze, his smirk fading. The woman, still trembling, stepped back. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Jack's grip tightened, not in anger, but in calm authority. He wasn't just some old man on a bench. He was a veteran, and he had earned the right to be respected. "You're not going anywhere," Jack said, his voice low but steady. The thief's face turned pale, his bravado slipping away. People around them began to murmur, realization dawning. No one had expected this quiet, unassuming man to step up. But as they watched him hold the thief in place, it became clear Jack wasn't just a bystander in this story. He was the hero. The thief, now panicking, tried to pull away, but Jack's grip remained unyielding. Within moments, a police officer arrived, and the situation was swiftly handled. The crowd began to disperse, some whispering about what had just happened. The woman, her hand still shaking, approached Jack. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. Jack only nodded, his face impassive, as he turned to walk away, disappearing into the crowd. He wasn't looking for recognition. He had already earned it, years ago, on a different battlefield. The streets were noisy again, but for those who had witnessed the scene, the silence of Jack's action spoke louder than any words could. Jack walked away from the scene with the steady, unhurried pace of someone who had learned long ago that rushing only made things worse. His shoes clicked against the sidewalk, each step echoing in the quiet aftermath of the chaos. The street was once again alive with noise and motion, but for a moment, it felt like everything had shifted. People went about their business, but their eyes followed Jack as he disappeared into the crowd. To them, he was just another old man, but to those who had seen what happened, he was something more, a silent guardian. As Jack turned the corner, the weight of his years seemed to lift for just a second. The memories, the battles, the loss, they were always there, lurking in the back of his mind. But today, for a moment, they were forgotten. He had done what he had always done, stepping in when it mattered, without thinking, without hesitation. It was a part of who he was now. The woman, her hand still shaking, had walked over to the police officer who had arrived just moments after the thief was restrained. She had looked at Jack, her expression a mix of gratitude and confusion. "Thank you," she had whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack hadn't replied. He never did. There was nothing to say. He had simply nodded, his gaze fixed ahead, as if the moment was already behind him. To the officer, Jack was just another witness, a quiet old man who had probably seen too much in his time. But the officer hadn't seen what Jack had done. The officer hadn't seen the way Jack had moved, how his calm, controlled presence had diffused the situation before it could escalate any further. As the police officer took the thief away in cuffs, the crowd began to thin, their murmurs of disbelief slowly fading into the background noise of the city. Some of them would forget about the incident in a few minutes. Others would remember it for a lifetime. But for Jack, it wasn't about recognition or thanks. It never had been. He had learned long ago that his battles weren't fought for the applause of others. His battles were fought in the quiet spaces, in the moments when no one was watching. And today had been just another reminder that the past, with all its pain and scars, never fully left him. As Jack walked away, he didn't think about the thief, or the woman, or the crowd that had watched. He thought about the places he had been, the people he had lost, and the price of silence. The silence that had saved a life today, just as it had so many times before. He walked on, the weight of his years once again settling on his shoulders. The city moved around him, but Jack was somewhere else, lost in the quiet places where memories lived. And for him, that was enough. As Jack continued his walk, the city's rhythm around him felt different. It wasn't the usual hum of traffic or the chatter of pedestrians, but a quiet hum that seemed to pull him into his own thoughts. He had done what he always did, but this time, something felt different. He had stopped the thief, but more than that, he had been seen. In the crowd, there had been that brief flicker of recognition, people who had witnessed what had happened, who had seen the quiet strength in his actions. But Jack wasn't one to linger on those things. He had been trained to act when needed, without expectation, without question. But it wasn't the first time he had stepped in. In his years of service, in the war-torn lands, he had saved lives, but it was the quiet moments that stuck with him the most. The moments when he was forgotten, when his deeds went unnoticed, that was what felt familiar. It was the way the world worked, no room for heroes, no applause for the quiet man in the corner. He had learned to live with it, to carry the weight of his silence as much as he had carried the weight of his years. Jack turned another corner, the sounds of the city growing louder as he entered a more crowded part of town. He had no destination in mind, walking was enough for him. It always had been. As he moved past a coffee shop, he noticed the faces of people sitting by the windows, each caught in their own world. They didn't see him, didn't recognize him for who he was. To them, he was just another old man on the street, moving with the quiet grace that came from decades of living. And that was fine. Jack wasn't looking for recognition. What mattered was that the woman was safe, that the thief had been stopped before things escalated further. The world could go on, oblivious to the brief moment of action that had just passed. But as Jack crossed the street, his eyes caught a flash of movement. A young man, walking in the opposite direction, caught sight of Jack and stopped short. There was something about the way the young man paused, his gaze lingering for a moment too long. Jack didn't react. He simply kept walking, his pace unchanged. The young man watched him for a few more seconds before turning away, shaking his head as if to clear his thoughts. Jack didn't think about it for long. It was a fleeting moment, another reminder that in the city, everyone was in their own world, and the only real connection was the one you made when you had to. As Jack reached the park, he slowed his steps. The bench was still there, the same one he had sat on earlier. He wasn't tired, not really, but the familiarity of it called to him. The quiet space. The solitude. The world. Continued to rush around him, but Jack was fine with that. He sat down, hands resting in his lap, and simply watched as life unfolded. People walked by, their faces a blur of motion. A few stopped to glance at him, but none stayed. It didn't matter. Jack wasn't here for anyone but himself. The bench creaked slightly under his weight as he settled in, his mind quiet, his body still. The wind rustled the leaves in the trees overhead, and Jack closed his eyes for a moment. The past, the present, all of it seemed to blend into one long stretch of memory. A life lived in silence, and yet, for a moment today, the silence had spoken louder than any words ever could. As Jack sat on the bench, the world continued around him, indifferent and busy. People walked past, their faces a blur of motion and noise, lost in their own lives, and Jack was just another fixture in the park. He wasn't in a hurry, never had been, not since those years that seemed like a lifetime ago. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. It was late afternoon, and the city's energy was starting to shift, moving from the hustle of the day to the more relaxed pace of the evening. A breeze picked up, rustling the leaves in the trees above him, and Jack closed his eyes for a moment, letting the cool air wash over him. He wasn't thinking about the thief, or the woman he had saved earlier. That part was over, and the memory was already fading, just another ripple in the sea of his life. No, what occupied his mind now were the long stretches of time, the empty moments, the quiet that filled his days. It was a life lived in solitude, and while some might have found that isolating, for Jack, it was a comfort. He had never needed much. The simple things, the things people often overlooked, were what mattered to him. A quiet afternoon. A gentle breeze. The sound of footsteps on the pavement. A bird singing in the distance. These were the things that brought him peace. The world was full of noise, full of people running from one thing to the next, chasing after goals they never seemed to reach. Jack had learned long ago that those things didn't matter. He had seen enough of the world, enough of the ugliness and the glory, to know that chasing fame, or recognition, or wealth was a fool's game. What mattered was finding peace in the small moments, the ones most people passed by without a second thought. As Jack sat there, his mind wandered back to the years he had spent in the service. The battles. The camaraderie. The losses. It had all shaped him into the man he was today, a man who knew what it meant to lose everything, and yet, still stand. His eyes opened, and he glanced around the park. A young couple was sitting on a nearby bench, laughing quietly, lost in their own world. A man was jogging along the path, headphones in, focused only on his pace. And a child, no older than 6 or 7, was playing on the grass, chasing after a butterfly. It was a peaceful scene, but one that Jack knew would soon fade. The day would end, and the park would empty out. People would go home, to their families, their jobs, their routines. And Jack would be left alone again, just as he always had been. But that was fine. He had never been afraid of solitude. In fact, it was in solitude that he found his clarity. As the evening drew closer, Jack stood up, stretching his stiff legs. The bench had been comfortable enough, but his body had its limits. He walked slowly across the park, taking in the sights and sounds one last time. The sun was now a low orange ball on the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city. He felt the weight of the day lift from his shoulders as he walked, his pace steady, his thoughts quiet. There was no destination in mind. He didn't need one. Just moving forward, step by step, as he always had. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As Jack continued his walk through the park, the cool evening air wrapped around him, and the sounds of the city began to quiet down. The once bustling streets now hummed with a softer, more reflective tone. Jack's pace remained steady, the rhythm of his footsteps almost meditative. He wasn't in a hurry. He never had been. He had learned long ago that the world would keep moving, whether he was a part of it or not. The park, a small green oasis in the middle of the city, had become his retreat over the years. It was a place where time seemed to slow down, where the weight of his past didn't feel as heavy. Jack had spent countless afternoons here, watching the world go by, reflecting on the choices he had made and the things he had lost. Today, though, there was something different in the air. A sense of quiet satisfaction, perhaps, or maybe just the knowledge that, for once, he had done something that mattered to someone. It wasn't about the applause or recognition. Jack had never cared for those things. But today, in that brief moment, he had stepped in when it mattered, and it had felt good. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As Jack reached the edge of the park, he He slowed his pace, taking in the view of the city skyline stretching out before him. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a fading glow that cast long shadows across the streets. The world was changing, but Jack remained the same. The people in the city rushed by, lost in their own lives, their own struggles. Some would never notice him, never know the quiet things he had done in his life. But that was fine. Jack wasn't here for anyone but himself. He had never needed the validation of others. He had learned to live with the silence, to find peace in the moments that others ignored. It wasn't an easy life, but it was his life. He had fought for it, both on the battlefield and in the quiet moments after. And now, as he stood there, looking out over the city, Jack realized that this was enough. He didn't need anything more. He didn't need to be remembered or honored. He just needed to keep moving forward, one step at a time. The city continued to hum around him, the lights flickering on as night settled in. But Jack stood still, his gaze fixed on the horizon, the weight of the past and the present blending together in the quiet spaces of his mind. The world could rush by, but Jack was content to let it. He had done his part. Now, it was time to keep walking. As Jack continued his walk through the quiet streets, he found himself back at the familiar corner where he often turned to head home. The evening had settled in fully, and the once vibrant city felt more distant, almost like it had retreated into itself. The lights from the buildings reflected off the wet pavement, creating pools of orange and white that danced with the rhythm of the passing cars. Jack's steps were slow, deliberate, as though the world had paused just for him, allowing him to take in each fleeting moment. His thoughts were still on the afternoon, but the memory now felt more like a distant echo, something that had happened and was now fading away, just like everything else. It wasn't that he regretted what he had done, far from it. It was just that Jack had learned to let go of things quickly. The world had a way of moving on, and so did he. The woman was safe, the thief had been stopped, and that was enough for him. He had done his part, and now it was time to move forward, as he always did. He passed by a small cafe, the warm light spilling out through the windows, and for a moment, he thought about stopping in. The thought lingered, but he quickly pushed it aside. He wasn't interested in a cup of coffee or conversation with strangers. He didn't need company. He had always preferred solitude, the quiet moments when he could just be with his thoughts. Jack's mind wandered to the days of his youth, the times when everything had seemed so clear, so purposeful. Back then, there was always something to fight for, something that gave each day meaning. But as the years passed, that purpose had shifted, and what once seemed so important faded away, leaving behind only the quiet, steady rhythm of life. He had seen the best and worst of humanity, and through it all, he had learned that the only thing that mattered was how you carried yourself in the quiet moments. The world could be chaotic, loud, and unpredictable, but as long as you remained true to yourself, you could find peace. Jack wasn't a hero, at least not in the way most people would define it. He didn't seek out danger, didn't crave attention, and didn't care for accolades. He simply did what needed to be done when the moment called for it. And that was all he needed to do. He turned the corner onto his street, his home now in sight. The lights inside were dim, just the way he liked it. He didn't need much, and he had learned to be content with less. Jack had long ago made peace with the idea that he wouldn't be remembered, that his actions wouldn't make headlines or inspire songs. He was just one man, living his life, doing what he could when he could. And that was enough. As he reached his door, he paused for a moment, looking out at the street one last time. The city continued its endless dance, people coming and going, lives unfolding, but Jack was ready to step inside and leave it all behind, at least for the night. He opened the door and stepped in, the warmth of his small home greeting him like an old friend. It was quiet, just the way he liked it, and for the first time in a while, Jack allowed himself to relax, knowing that, for now, everything was as it should be. As Jack sat in his small living room, the familiar quiet of his home surrounded him like a blanket. The soft hum of the refrigerator in the corner, the gentle ticking of the clock on the wall, the rustling of the leaves outside the window, these were the sounds of his life. The world outside seemed distant now, as though it belonged to someone else. He had stepped away from it, not out of bitterness or anger, but simply because it no longer held the meaning it once had. The battles, the victories, the losses, all of them had led him to this point, this moment of stillness. Jack's fingers absent-mindedly traced the edge of his coffee cup, the warmth of the drink seeping into his hands. It was a comfort, a small pleasure, but one he savored. The world might be loud, it might be chaotic, but in his own space, in his own time, Jack had found his peace. The events of the afternoon, the woman, the thief, they had come and gone, and Jack was content with that. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to reflect for long. He had done what needed to be done, and that was enough. He had no desire for recognition, no need for anyone to thank him. He had done what was right, and that was all that mattered. As he sat there, a faint sound broke through his thoughts. A knock at the door. It was soft, almost hesitant, but it was there. Jack stood slowly, his joints creaking as he made his way to the door. He hadn't been expecting anyone. He didn't have many visitors these days. He opened the door to find a young man standing there, his hands stuffed into his jacket pockets, his posture a bit unsure. The man looked familiar, but Jack couldn't place him right away. "Excuse me," the young man said, his voice a little nervous. I saw what you did earlier. With the thief." Jack blinked, his gaze steady as he regarded the man. It wasn't often that someone approached him like this. Most people either ignored him or forgot about him entirely once he was out of sight. "I just wanted to say thank you," the young man continued, his voice more confident now. "I don't think anyone else would have stepped in like that." Jack remained silent, his expression unreadable. The young man shifted on his feet, clearly uncomfortable under the older man's steady gaze. "I've seen a lot of people walk by in my life," the man said, a small chuckle escaping his lips. "But you just stepped up. Without thinking." Jack's eye softened slightly. He didn't speak for a long moment, considering the words carefully before responding. "Sometimes, that's all you can do," he said quietly. "Step up when it matters." The young man nodded, looking down at his feet for a moment. "Yeah," he said softly. "Yeah, I think I get it." There was a pause, and then the young man looked up, offering a small, awkward smile. "Anyway, I just wanted to say thanks. I won't forget it." With that, he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the night. Jack watched him go, standing in the doorway for a long time after the man had disappeared from sight. It wasn't often that someone acknowledged him, let alone thanked him for something so small in the grand scheme of things. But there it was. A small moment of recognition, a fleeting connection in the midst of his quiet life. Jack closed the door gently behind him and returned to his chair, the soft creak of the wood beneath him grounding him in the stillness. He didn't need more than that. A quiet thanks, a simple acknowledgment. It was enough. The world would go on, people would forget, but in that brief moment, Jack had made a difference. And that was all he needed. The next few days passed in a quiet rhythm, much like any other day in Jack's life. He had settled back into his routine, his thoughts drifting from one quiet moment to the next. The world outside moved at its usual pace, but for Jack, time had slowed, and each day felt like a soft echo of the last. The young man's brief visit had stayed with him longer than he expected. It wasn't the gratitude that lingered, but the brief connection, the recognition of something Jack had always kept hidden. It was a strange feeling, but not unpleasant. Most people didn't take the time to notice him, let alone thank him for something so small. But the young man had seen something. Maybe it wasn't much, but it was enough. Jack didn't know what to make of it, but he didn't dwell on it either. Life had a way of offering small moments of meaning, and Jack had learned to take them when they came, without expectation. The morning was cool as Jack stepped outside for his usual walk. The city had woken up, the sounds of traffic and people filling the air as the sun began to rise higher. Jack walked slowly, as he always did, his eyes fixed on the ground in front of him. He wasn't in a hurry. He never had been. His pace was steady, each step measured and deliberate, a rhythm he had grown used to over the years. As he passed by the cafe once more, Jack noticed something he hadn't before: the small group of people seated by the window, their laughter soft but genuine, their conversation light. It was a moment of joy, fleeting but real. He wasn't part of it, but for a moment, he didn't mind. He watched them for a few seconds, the warmth of their connection something he could appreciate from afar. Jack knew he would never be one to join in, but there was something peaceful in seeing others find comfort in each other. He moved on, his gaze shifting once more to the path ahead of him. The street seemed quieter. Now, the world still in motion but less chaotic. Jack took another deep breath, the crisp air filling his lungs. There was a sense of calm that had settled in the city, and for the first time in a long while, Jack allowed himself to let go of the weight that had been with him for so long. As he neared the park, he slowed his pace, the familiar sight of the bench in the distance pulling him forward. It was a small thing, but it was his thing. The place where he could sit and simply be, where the world could continue around him without interruption. He reached the bench and sat down, his body sinking into the familiar comfort. The park was quieter now, the sounds of the city far away. Jack closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face and the gentle breeze that rustled the leaves above him. The world outside was still there, but for Jack, it didn't matter. He was content in this moment, in the peace he had found. Life had a way of surprising him with small moments like this, and today, that was enough. Jack didn't need anything more. He didn't need recognition or gratitude. He didn't need anything beyond the stillness of this moment, and in that, he found his peace. The days continued to pass in a peaceful blur, each one much like the last. Jack's routine remained unchanged, a steady rhythm that brought a sense of comfort to his life. The city around him buzzed with the constant hum of activity, but in his small corner of the world, Jack remained content. He had long ago accepted that he wasn't meant for anything more than the quiet moments he could carve out for himself. His interactions with the world were few, and that was how he liked it. But as the weeks went on, something inside Jack began to shift, though he didn't fully understand it at first. He found himself more aware of the small connections he had with the people around him. It wasn't that he sought them out, but they seemed to appear at the oddest times, like the brief conversation with the young man that had stopped him in front of his door. The gratitude was unexpected, but it lingered in Jack's mind, even after the young man had walked away. It wasn't just the thank you, but the recognition in the young man's eyes. Jack had done nothing to earn that kind of attention, yet there it was. He hadn't thought much about it at the time, but now, it seemed to echo in his thoughts, a subtle reminder that sometimes, even in his silence, he had an impact. It wasn't much, he told himself, but it was enough. Jack had never needed much from the world, and he still didn't. But the feeling of being seen, even for a fleeting moment, was something he hadn't expected. And it made him think, just for a second, that maybe he wasn't as invisible as he had always believed. Life went on, as it always did. The days grew shorter as winter began to edge its way into the city. The chill in the air became sharper, and Jack wrapped himself in his coat a little tighter as he walked through the streets. He passed the same familiar landmarks, the same faces, some of whom he had seen for years, yet none of them seemed to notice him. And that was just fine. Jack wasn't looking for recognition. Still, he couldn't shake the thought that lingered in the back of his mind. The world had a way of surprising him, of offering small glimpses of something more than the quiet life he had come to expect. As he approached the park one afternoon, Jack paused for a moment, his eye scanning the benches that lined the path. There was something about the park in the winter, how the trees stood bare, the ground hard beneath the weight of the frost. It was a stark beauty, the kind that spoke of quiet endurance, of survival through the seasons. Jack stepped onto the path and made his way to his usual bench, the one he had sat on countless times before. He sat down and exhaled slowly, the weight of his breath fogging in the cold air. He didn't need anything more. He had learned that much. The peace he had found, the quiet moments that made up his days, were enough. And yet, there was a part of him that wondered what it would be like if things were different. If he were seen more, recognized for the things he had done, for the life he had lived. But even as the thought crossed his mind, Jack knew it didn't matter. What mattered was this. The stillness of the park, the quiet of the afternoon, the way the world continued on, oblivious to the small moments of connection that made up his life. He didn't need more than that. Jack sat there for a long time, watching the sun sink lower in the sky, the last light of the day casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. It was the end of another day, and Jack was content. He didn't need to change the world, or be seen in a way he never had been. He only needed to be here, in this moment, and for now, that was enough.